You tell yourself you just haven't met the right person yet, and maybe that's true. But somewhere along the way, something quietly shifted. You stopped reaching out first. You started filling evenings with routines so specific, so perfectly timed, that even the idea of someone else being present feels disruptive. You think you want connection, but when it gets close, something in you pulls back, not dramatically, just slightly, just enough. This looks like someone who doesn't care about love, but it's actually something much more human than that. So what really happens to a man the longer he goes without a relationship, not on the surface, but deep in the architecture of how he feels and thinks and moves through the world? Let's slow down and look. First, understand this. Nothing about what you're about to hear means something is wrong with you. The brain is not broken when it does this. It is working exactly as designed. When something is absent long enough, the brain stops treating it as missing and starts treating it as unnecessary. That's not failure, that's adaptation. And adaptation, no matter how uncomfortable, always begins as protection. You are not a man who can't love. You are a man whose nervous system learned to be very, very efficient without it. The first thing that happens is subtle. So subtle you might not even name it. You become deeply comfortable alone, and then you forget that comfort has a cost. Solitude in the right doses is restorative. It gives the mind space to think, to create, to decompress. But extended solitude isn't just quiet. It becomes calibrated. You learn the exact temperature you like the room, the exact order of your evenings, the exact rhythm of your weekends. And that calibration starts to feel less like preference and more like identity. Psychologists call this something close to what attachment theorists describe as avoidant patterning, not coldness, but self-sufficiency turned inward so far it starts to look like a wall. The man doesn't build the wall on purpose. He builds routines, and the routines become the wall. Think of someone like a musician who's toured solo for years. They can share a stage, but sharing a kitchen, sharing a Tuesday morning, sharing the mundane weight of daily life, that starts to feel like static in a signal they've worked hard to clear. The reframe: this was never about not wanting love. It was about protecting the one environment you learned to control, your inner world. The second shift is harder to see because it disguises itself as wisdom. Standards rise, patience shortens. The longer a man has been alone, the more he has lived inside his own preferences unchallenged. No compromises about where to eat, no negotiations about how to spend Sunday, no emotional labor of managing someone else's difficult week while also managing his own. And slowly, without realizing it, the bar for what feels worth disrupting this for climbs higher and higher. This isn't arrogance, this is nervous system math. The brain is constantly doing a cost-benefit analysis of energy. Connection requires energy, emotional, cognitive, physical. When you've lived without that expenditure for long enough, even small relational demands register as disproportionately large. A text that needs a thoughtful reply, a plan that requires coordinating schedules, a moment where someone needs you to be emotionally present when you were, 10 minutes ago, perfectly fine by yourself. It's not that he doesn't care, it's that his baseline of fine has recalibrated so completely that anything that disturbs it feels louder than it used to. The reframe: he isn't demanding. He's just been the only variable in his own equation for so long that adding another one feels like relearning algebra from scratch. But here's the part nobody tells you. The longer the absence, the more love gets intellectualized. A man who hasn't been in a relationship in years often doesn't stop thinking about connection. He thinks about it more, but he thinks about it from a distance, analyzing it, romanticizing it in theory, almost writing it in his head the way a screenwriter imagines a scene they never intend to film. The idea of a relationship becomes a beautiful abstraction, safe because it isn't real, controllable because it only exists in imagination. This is the brain's most elegant trick, replacing emotional risk with intellectual exploration. He reads about attachment. He understands the psychology of love better than most people in relationships do. He could explain vulnerability, intimacy, and emotional safety with startling clarity. But ask him to sit across from someone on a third date and feel genuinely open. And something freezes, because understanding a thing and inhabiting a thing are two completely different nervous system experiences. Then comes the identity piece, and this one is deep. The longer a man has lived outside of partnership, the more being alone stops being a situation and starts being a story he tells about himself. It begins innocently. He's the independent one, the one who doesn't need much, the one who's selective. And those labels, over time, harden, not because he chose them consciously, but because identity, once formed, becomes something the mind protects. Changing would mean admitting that the story was a coping mechanism all along, and that kind of honesty is uncomfortable in a very specific, very quiet way. The brain doesn't want to rewrite its own chapters. It prefers continuity, even when the chapter isn't serving you. Psychologists sometimes call this identity protection, the invisible work the mind does to maintain a coherent self-concept, even at the cost of growth. This behavior, all of it, the routines, the rising standards, the intellectualizing, the identity, is doing one thing at its core. It is regulating emotion. Think of it as a blanket the nervous system pulls over itself, not to hide, just to stay warm. When the world becomes unpredictable, and love is deeply unpredictable, the mind finds ways to manufacture a steadiness. Routines are steadiness. Self-sufficiency is steadiness. Keeping connection at the level of idea rather than experience is steadiness. It is not dysfunction. It is the oldest human response to uncertainty. Find what you can control and hold it. The man who has been alone for a long time isn't someone who failed at love. He is someone who built a very sophisticated shelter, stone by stone in the absence of it. And here is where this becomes something worth sitting with quietly. None of this makes you less capable of love. None of this means the door is closed. It means you adapted. Brilliantly, actually. The brain did what brains do. It found equilibrium. It found a way to make a life feel coherent and livable without the one thing that, somewhere underneath all the calibration and the routines and the comfortable solitude, you probably still want. That want didn't go away. It just learned to be quiet. You are not someone who can't connect. You are someone whose nervous system learned to wait very, very patiently. And somewhere in that patience, it built walls it forgot were temporary. There is no shame in any of that. There is only this: you are more human, more layered, and more capable of depth than the distance you've kept would suggest, and you already knew that. Somewhere, you already knew.